Princess Lirelei had always believed that being royal meant safety. She thought her crown would protect her forever. But standing in the freezing snow with nothing but the clothes on her back, she realized how wrong she had been. Just 3 days ago, she was sitting on her golden throne, making decisions for her kingdom. Today, she was trudging through snow that came up to her knees, her fancy royal dress torn and dirty. The wind cut through her like a knife, and every step felt like walking through ice water. "Your Highness, I can't feel my fingers," Torvin said beside her. It was her personal servant, the only person who had chosen to leave the palace with her. While everyone else had turned their backs on her, he had grabbed a small bag of food and followed her into exile. Lirelei looked at him with worry. Torvin was only 22 years old, and he had never been outside the warm palace walls. His face was already turning blue from the cold, and his whole body was shaking. She knew that if they didn't find shelter soon, they would both freeze to death. Just a little further, she told him, though she had no idea where they were going. The mountains stretched endlessly in every direction, covered in white snow that sparkled like diamonds in the fading sunlight. The whole mess had started when her cousin accused her of stealing money from the kingdom's treasury. It was a lie, but he had planted fake evidence and bribed the right people. Before she knew it, the palace guards were escorting her to the border, telling her she could never return. "You have 1 hour to leave the kingdom," the head guard had said. "If you're found here after sunset, you'll be arrested." That's when Torvin had surprised her. Instead of staying in his comfortable servant quarters, he had run after her with tears in his eyes. "I'm coming with you," he had said. "I know you didn't steal anything. You're the kindest person I've ever met." Now, as they walked through the wilderness, Lirelei felt guilty for letting him come. She should have sent him back to safety. But she was also grateful not to be alone in this frozen wasteland. The sun was setting fast, painting the sky orange and pink. Soon it would be completely dark, and the temperature would drop even more. They had been walking for hours, and her feet felt like blocks of ice inside her thin royal slippers. "Look." Torvin pointed ahead with his shaking hand.
"Ow!"
"There's a building." Through the swirling snow, they could see a small wooden cabin. It looked old and abandoned, but it had 4 walls and a roof. Right now, that seemed like a palace to them. They stumbled to the door and pushed it open. Inside, the cabin was dark and cold, but at least it blocked the wind. There was a small fireplace, but no wood to burn. A few old blankets were folded on a wooden bed, but they were thin and full of holes. "We need to start a fire," Lirelei said, her breath making white clouds in the air. They searched everywhere for wood or anything that would burn, but found nothing. The previous owner had taken everything useful. Outside, the wind howled like a wild animal, and snow began falling harder. Torvin sat on the bed, wrapping one of the thin blankets around himself. His teeth were chattering so hard he could barely speak. "I'm so sorry, Princess. I thought I could help you, but I'm just making things worse." Lirelei felt her heart break. This brave young man had given up his warm bed and regular meals to help her, and now he might die because of her problems. She had to do something. She looked at the thin blankets and realized they wouldn't be enough to keep them warm through the night. The temperature was dropping fast, and they could both see their breath in the air. She had learned about hypothermia in her royal education, and she knew the signs. Torvin was already shivering uncontrollably and having trouble speaking clearly. "Listen to me," she said, sitting beside him on the bed. "We need to share body heat, or we're both going to freeze to death." Torvin looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we need to lie close together under these blankets. Not the only way to stay warm enough to survive the night."
Bye.
His eyes went wide. "But Princess, that wouldn't be proper. You're royalty, and I'm just a servant." "Forget about proper," she snapped, fear making her voice sharp. "Royal rules don't matter when we're about to freeze to death. Right now, we're just 2 people trying to survive." She grabbed all the blankets they could find and spread them on the small bed. Then she looked at Torvin seriously. "I'm not asking you as a princess giving orders to a servant. I'm asking you as a friend who doesn't want either of us to die tonight." Torvin nodded slowly, understanding how desperate their situation was. They both kept their clothes on and lay down on the bed, pulling the blankets over them. At first, it felt awkward and embarrassing, But as their combined body heat began to warm the small space under the blankets, they both stopped shivering.
Thank you, Torvin whispered.
For trusting me enough to do this. Lirelei felt tears in her eyes. 3 days ago, she had been worried about which dress to wear to the royal dinner. Now, she was lying in a freezing cabin with her servant, both of them just trying to live through the night. I should be thanking you, she said quietly. Could have stayed in your warm room and eaten hot meals every day. Instead, you chose to follow me into this mess. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and snow piled up against the cabin walls. But inside, wrapped in thin blankets and sharing warmth, they both began to feel their bodies warming up. The immediate danger of freezing was passing, but they both knew this was just the beginning of their troubles. What are we going to do? Tomorrow? Torvin asked. Lirelei thought about it. She had no money, no food, no warm clothes, and no idea where they were. But for the first time since leaving the palace, she felt a spark of determination instead of just fear. We're going to survive, she said firmly. We're going to learn how to live out here, and we're going to prove that I'm not the criminal they said I was. As they lay there in the darkness, listening to the storm outside, both of them knew their old lives were over. The princess and the servant were gone. They were just two people facing the unknown together, and somehow, that felt like the beginning of something new instead of just an ending. When morning came, Lirelei woke up to sunlight streaming through the cabin's dirty windows. For a moment, she forgot where she was and expected to see her silk curtains and golden bed. Then reality hit her like a cold slap. She was still in the abandoned cabin, still wearing her torn dress, and still in exile with no home to return to. Torvin was already awake, sitting by the window and looking outside. Princess, we have a problem, he said quietly. She sat up and looked where he was, pointing. Their footprints from yesterday were clearly visible in the snow, leading straight to the cabin door. Anyone following them would know exactly where they were hiding. She need to leave, she said, her stomach twisting with fear. They sent people to look for us. This is the first place they'll check. But as they stepped outside, another problem became clear. The snow was even deeper now, and their thin royal shoes were completely useless. Within minutes, their feet were soaked and freezing. Lirelei's fancy dress dragged in the snow, making it even harder to walk. I can't do this, she said, stopping after just a few steps. I don't know how to survive out here. I don't know how to find food or make fire or stay warm. I'm completely useless. Torvin looked at her with surprise. You're not useless. You're the smartest person I know. You speak 5 languages and can solve math problems in your head. You just need to learn different things now. But knowing languages won't help us find food, she said, feeling hopeless. Maybe it will, Torvin said thoughtfully. My grandfather used to tell me stories about surviving in the wilderness. He was a scout for the army before he became a palace worker. Taught me some things when I was little, but I never thought I'd need them. This was news to Lirelei. In all the years Torvin had worked at the palace, she had never known anything about his family. Palace servants rarely talked about their personal lives. What kind of things? She asked. Well, he showed me how to recognize tracks in the snow. And he taught me which plants are safe to eat and which ones will make you sick, he said. The most important thing is to stay calm and think clearly. As they walked, Torvin began pointing out things his grandfather had taught him. He showed her how to tell the difference between deer tracks and rabbit tracks. He pointed to certain trees and explained that the bark could be eaten if they got desperate enough. Look, he said, kneeling down next to a small bush. These are winter berries. They're sour, but they won't hurt you. He picked a few and handed them to her. Lirelei tasted one and made a face. It was incredibly sour, but it was food. How do you remember all this? My grandfather made me practice whenever we walked around the palace gardens. He said you never know when survival skills might save your life. I thought he was just being dramatic, but I guess he was right. As the day went on, Lirelei began to see Torvin differently. In the palace, he had seemed clumsy and nervous, always dropping things or forgetting instructions. But out here, he was confident and knowledgeable. He found a small cave where they could rest without leaving obvious tracks. He He showed her how to make a simple trap using branches and string from her dress. "You're amazing at this," she told him as he set up the trap. "Why didn't you ever tell me you knew about survival?" Torvin blushed. "You never asked? Besides, palace servants aren't supposed to talk about themselves. We're supposed to be invisible." That comment hit Lorelei hard. She realized that. In all the years Torvin had served her, she had never asked him about his life, his family, or his dreams. She had treated him kindly, but she had never treated him like a real person with his own story. "I'm sorry," she said. I should have cared about you as a person, not just as someone who brought me food and cleaned my room." "It's okay," Torvin said. "That's just how things work in the palace. But out here things are different, aren't they?" They spent the afternoon practicing skills that Torvin remembered from his grandfather's lessons. Lorelei learned how to start a fire using flint and dry grass. It took her 20 tries. But when the first small flame appeared, she felt prouder than she had ever felt. About any royal accomplishment, "I did it," she shouted, then quickly covered her mouth. They couldn't make too much noise in case someone was looking for them. "You're a natural," Torvin said, smiling. "My grandfather always said that smart people can learn anything if they put their minds to it." As evening approached, they found another sheltered spot to spend the night. This time, they had a small fire and some berries to eat. It wasn't much, but it felt like a feast compared to the night before. Torvin, Lorelei said as they sat by the fire, "Can you tell me more about your grandfather? What was he like?" Torvin's face lit up. "He was the kindest man I ever met. He came from a poor family, but he worked hard and became one of the best scouts in the kingdom. He could track animals for miles and find water in the driest places. But he also loved books and stories. He's the one who taught me to read." "I didn't know palace servants could read," Lorelei said, then immediately felt embarrassed. "Sorry, that sounded terrible. It's okay. Most servants can't read. But my grandfather said knowledge is the one thing nobody can take away from you. He was right about that, too." As they prepared to sleep, Lorelei felt grateful for Torvin's company, not just because he was keeping her alive, but because she was finally getting to know the real person behind the nervous servant she had known for years. "Tomorrow, we need to find a more permanent shelter," she said. "And we need to start thinking about what we're going to do long term." "Are you thinking about trying to go back?" Torvin asked. Lorelei stared into the fire. "I don't. No. Part of me wants to prove my innocence and reclaim my throne. But another part of me wonders if maybe this is a chance to become someone different, someone better." "You're already better," Torvin said quietly. "The princess I knew 3 days ago would never have learned to make fire or eat sour berries without complaining. She definitely wouldn't have cared about a servant's grandfather." As they settled down for the night, sharing blankets and body heat again, Lorelei realized that losing her crown might have been the best thing that ever happened to her. For the first time in her life, she was learning who she really was when everything else was stripped away. "Thank you," she whispered to Torvin as they drifted off to sleep. "For what?" "For showing me that there's more to life than being a princess, for being the first real friend I've ever had." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside their small shelter, 2 people who had started as princess and servant were becoming something new together. After 5 days of walking through the mountains, Lorelei and Torvin were barely alive. Their food had run out 2 days ago, and they had been eating only berries and tree bark. Lorelei's royal dress was now just rags, and both of them looked like they hadn't slept in weeks. "I can't go any further," Lorelei said, collapsing against a tree. Her feet were covered in blisters, and every muscle in her body ached. "Maybe we should just give up." Torvin sat down beside her, breathing heavily. "Don't say that. You've come too far to quit now." But privately, he was worried too. They had been walking in circles for the past day, unable to find any shelter or food. Worse, they had started hearing voices behind them. Someone was definitely following their trail. "Listen," Torvin said suddenly, tilting his head.
Ow.
"Do you hear that?" Lorelei listened carefully. Through the wind, she could hear something that sounded like voices, but not the threatening voices of people hunting them. These sounded different, normal, like people having everyday conversations. They helped each other stand up and carefully made their way toward the sound. As they climbed over a small hill, they couldn't believe what they saw below them. Hidden in a valley between the mountains was a small village. There were about 20 wooden houses, smoke rising from their chimneys, and people walking around doing normal village things. Children were playing in the snow, women were hanging laundry, and men were chopping wood. "Is this real?" whispered. "Or are we so hungry we're seeing things?" Before Torvin could answer, a man appeared behind them. He was tall and had gray hair, and he was holding a hunting bow with an arrow pointed right at them. "Who are you?" he asked in a stern voice. "And why are you spying on our village?" Lirelei tried to stand up straight and look dignified, but it was hard when she was wearing torn rags and had dirt all over her face. "I am Princess Lirelei of the Northern Kingdom, and this is my companion Torvin. We're seeking shelter." The man laughed, but not in a mean way. "Princess, you look more like a beggar who's been lost in the woods for weeks." "That's because I have been," Lirelei said honestly. "I was exiled from my kingdom 5 days ago, and we've been trying to survive out here ever since." The man studied them for a long moment. Something in Lirelei's voice must have convinced him she was telling the truth, because he lowered his bow. "My name is Commander Aldrich," he said. "I'm the leader of this village. Come with me, but don't try anything suspicious. We have rules here, and we don't trust outsiders easily." As they walked into the village, Lirelei noticed that everyone stopped what they were doing to stare at them. People here looked different from the soft palace dwellers she was used to. They were tough and weathered, with the kind of faces that had seen hard times. "This is Haven's End," Aldrich explained. As they walked, "It's a place for people who don't have anywhere else to go. Everyone here has their own story of loss or exile." They stopped at a small house where a woman was cooking soup over a fire. She looked up when they approached, and her eyes widened when she saw how terrible Lirelei and Torvin looked. "Mira," Aldrich said to the woman, "these two need food and medical attention. They claim to be refugees from the Northern Kingdom." Mira immediately put down her ladle and came over to them. "You poor things, you look half dead. Come inside and get warm." The inside of the house was simple but clean. There was a fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner. To Lirelei, who had been sleeping on the ground for days, it looked like paradise. Mira brought them bowls of hot soup and pieces of bread. Lirelei had never tasted anything so delicious in her life. The warmth of the food spread through her body, and she felt human again for the first time in days. "Now," Aldrich said, sitting across from them, "tell me the real story. Who are you, and why are you here?" Lirelei told him everything. She explained about being accused of stealing money, about her exile, and about their journey through the mountains. She was honest about being a princess, but she didn't act like it made her special. When she finished, Aldrich was quiet for a long time. "So you're saying you're innocent of the charges?" "Swear it on my life," Lirelei said. "I never stole anything. I was framed by people who wanted to take my throne." "And you," Aldrich said, turning to Torvin, "you gave up your comfortable life to follow her into exile?" Torvin nodded. "She's a good person. She didn't deserve what happened to her." Aldrich exchanged glances with Mira. "Well, your story is certainly interesting. But here's the thing about Haven's End. We don't care who you used to be. We only care about who you are now and what you can contribute to our community." "What do you mean?" Lirelei asked. "I mean that if you want to stay here, you'll have to earn your place just like everyone else. There are no princesses in Haven's End, just people who work together to survive." Lirelei felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that they might have found safety, but fear that she didn't know how to be anything other than a princess.
What?
"What I need to do?" she asked. "The same thing everyone else does," Mira said kindly. "Help with cooking, cleaning, farming, defense, whatever needs to be done. Can you do that?" "I don't know," Lirelei said honestly. "I've never done any of those things before. But I'm willing to learn." For the next few days, Lirelei discovered just how much she didn't know about basic survival. When she tried to help with cooking, she burned the soup. When she tried to chop wood, she nearly cut her own foot. When she tried to help with farming, she pulled up all the good plants and left the weeds. Some of the villagers started to whisper that she was useless, that she was just a spoiled princess who would never be able to contribute anything meaningful. Lirelei heard these whispers, and they hurt more than she expected. "Maybe they're right," she said to Torvin. One evening, as they sat by the fire in the small house they had been given, "Maybe I am just a useless princess." "Don't say that," Torvin said firmly. "You're not useless. You're just learning. Remember when I couldn't even make a fire? Now look at me." It was true. Torvin had adapted to village life much faster than Lirelei. He was already helping with hunting and had made friends with several of the other villagers. But instead of making Lirelei feel worse, his success gave her hope. "You're right," she said. "I just need to find the right way to help." The next morning, Lirelei noticed that some of the village children were having trouble with their lessons. The village had one teacher, but she was overwhelmed trying to teach 20 children of different ages all at the same time. "I can help." With that, Lirelei offered. "I know how to read and write in 5 languages, and I'm good at mathematics." The teacher looked skeptical. "Can you really? Or are you just saying that to make yourself feel important?" "Let me show you," Lirelei said. She spent the morning working with the children, and by afternoon, even the skeptical teacher had to admit that Lirelei was an excellent educator. She had a natural way of explaining difficult concepts, and she was patient with the slower students. "Where did you learn to teach like that?" the teacher asked. "I had many tutors when I was growing up," Lirelei explained. "I learned from watching how they taught me. The good ones and the bad ones." Word spread quickly through the village that the former princess was actually useful after all. Soon people were coming to her with other problems. They needed help, writing letters to relatives in other villages. They needed someone to help them calculate how much food they would need for winter. They needed someone who could speak other languages to help them trade with neighboring communities. First time since her exile, Lirelei felt like she had a purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was contributing something valuable to a community that needed her skills. "I think I'm starting to understand," she told Torvin as they walked through the village one evening. "Being a real leader isn't about wearing a crown and giving orders. It's about using your abilities to help other people." "You're finally getting it," Torvin said with a smile. "And you know what? I think you're going to be a much better leader now than you ever were before." As they watched the sunset over the mountains, Lirelei felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt like she belonged somewhere, not because of her title, but because of who she was as a person. 3 weeks had passed since Lirelei and Torvin arrived at Haven's End. For the first time since her exile, Lirelei felt truly happy. She had found her place in the village, teaching children and helping with planning and organization. The villagers had stopped seeing her as a useless princess and started treating her like one of their own. But that peaceful feeling was about to be shattered. It was early morning when the village watchman came running down from his post on the hill. "Armed men approaching from the south," he shouted. "At least 12 riders, all carrying weapons." Lirelei's blood turned to ice. She knew exactly who those men were. The bounty hunters had finally found them. Commander Aldrich immediately started organizing the village defenses. "Women and children to the safe houses," he commanded. "Everyone else, grab your weapons and get to your positions." But Lirelei could see the fear in people's eyes. Haven's End was a peaceful village, not a military outpost. Most of the residents were farmers, teachers, and craftsmen who had fled to the mountains to escape their old lives. They weren't prepared for a real battle. "This is my fault," Lirelei said to Aldrich. "They're here because of me. I should leave the village so you don't have to fight." "Absolutely not," Aldrich replied firmly. "You're one of us now. We don't abandon our people." Torvin appeared at her side, carrying a bow and looking more serious than she had ever seen him. "What's the plan?" he asked. "The plan is to protect our home," Aldrich said. "But I won't lie to you. We're outnumbered, and they have better weapons than we do." Lirelei looked around at the villagers preparing for battle. She saw old men trying to remember how to hold swords, women kissing their husbands goodbye, and children being rushed to safety. These people had welcomed her when she had nothing. They had given her a new life and a new purpose. Now they were about to risk everything to protect her. "Wait," she said, an idea forming in her mind. "What if we don't fight them head on? What if we use the terrain to our advantage?" Aldrich looked at her curiously. What do you mean? I studied military strategy as part of my royal education, Lirelei explained. The village is in a valley, which seems like a disadvantage, but it's actually perfect for an ambush. If we can get them to come into the village, we can attack them from multiple directions. But how do we get them to come down here instead of just surrounding us? Asked one of the villagers. Lirelei took a deep breath. We give them what they want, me.
Oh.
Torvin said immediately, That's too dangerous. Not really, Lirelei said, her mind racing through the possibilities. Think about it. They want to capture me alive, not dead. Otherwise they would have just shot arrows at us from the hilltop. That gives us an advantage. She quickly explained her plan. It was risky, but it was their best chance of protecting the village with minimal casualties. An hour later, the bounty hunters rode into Haven's End. They were confident and relaxed, thinking they had cornered their prey in a defenseless village. Their leader, a tall man with scars on his face, dismounted his horse and called out loudly. We're here for the criminal Princess Lirelei, he announced. Hand her over and nobody gets hurt. Lirelei stepped out from behind a building, her hands raised. I'm here, she said, but I want to make a deal. The leader laughed. You're not in a position to make deals, princess. You're coming with us. Actually, I think I am, Lirelei said calmly. You see, you made a mistake coming into our village instead of just waiting for us to come out. The leader looked confused. What are you talking about? That's when Lirelei gave the signal. Villagers appeared from behind buildings on rooftops and from hidden positions all around the square. They had crossbows, swords, and farming tools, all pointed at the bounty hunters. You're surrounded, Aldrich announced, stepping out with his own weapon drawn. Drop your weapons and leave, or we'll defend our village. The bounty hunters looked around nervously. They'd expected to find a defenseless village, not a well-organized defense force. You can't do this, the leader said, trying to sound confident. We're here on official business from the Northern Kingdom. This isn't the Northern Kingdom, Lirelei replied, and we don't recognize their authority here. What followed was a tense standoff. The bounty hunters were skilled fighters, but they were outnumbered and in unfamiliar territory. After several minutes of threats and negotiations, they realized they were in a losing position. This isn't over, the leader said as his men slowly backed toward their horses. We'll be back with more men. We'll be ready, Aldrich replied. As the bounty hunters rode away, the villagers cheered. They had won their first battle, and nobody had been seriously hurt. But Lirelei knew this was just the beginning. That evening, as the village celebrated their victory, Aldrich pulled Lirelei aside for a private conversation. That was impressive strategy, he said. You have a natural talent for leadership. Thank you, Lirelei said. But I'm worried about what happens next. They'll come back. And they'll bring more men. Yes, they will, Aldrich agreed. Which is why I need to tell you something important. Haven's End isn't just a village of random refugees. We're part of something bigger. Lirelei looked at him with surprise. What do you mean? There's a network of people throughout the kingdom who are unhappy with the current government. People who believe in justice and want to see corrupt leaders removed from power. You're talking about a rebellion, Lirelei said. I'm talking about taking back what was stolen from the people, Aldrich corrected. And you, princess, could be the symbol that unites everyone. Lirelei felt overwhelmed. I don't know if I'm ready for that. I'm still learning how to be a regular person, let alone a leader of a rebellion. You proved today that you're already a leader, Aldrich said. The question is, are you willing to fight for your people, or are you content to hide in the mountains forever? That night, Lirelei couldn't sleep. She walked to the edge of the village and looked out at the stars. Torvin found her there an hour later. Couldn't sleep either? He asked, sitting down beside her. Aldrich wants me to lead a rebellion, she said. He thinks I could unite people against the corrupt government that exiled me. What do you think? Torvin asked. I think I'm scared, Lirelei said honestly. 3 weeks ago, I was just trying to survive. Now he's asking me to risk everything to save a kingdom that rejected me. But it's not really about the kingdom that rejected you, Torvin said thoughtfully. It's about the people who are suffering under bad leadership. People like the ones in this village who just risked their lives to protect you. Lirelei thought about the children she had been teaching, the families who had welcomed her, and the villagers who had stood up to armed bounty hunters to keep her safe. "You're right," she said. "This isn't about getting my crown back. It's about making sure people like these have a chance at a better life. So what are you going to do?" Torvin asked. Lirelei stood up and looked back at the village where people were sleeping peacefully, trusting that they would be safe. "I'm going to fight," she said. "But not as a princess trying to reclaim her throne. As a person who believes that everyone deserves to be treated fairly." "Then I'll fight with you," Torvin said. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As they walked back toward the village, Lirelei felt a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing to fight for something bigger than herself. And for the first time since her exile, she felt ready for whatever challenge came next. 6 months had passed since the bounty hunters attacked Haven's End. What started as a small village defense had grown into something much bigger. Word had spread throughout the kingdom about the exiled princess who was fighting for the common people. Supporters began arriving at the village every week. Lirelei had transformed from a lost refugee into a confident leader. She had cut her long royal hair short for practical reasons, traded her fancy dresses for simple traveling clothes, and learned to fight with both sword and bow. But the biggest change was in her heart. She no longer thought about reclaiming her throne for personal glory. Instead, she dreamed of creating a kingdom where everyone would be treated fairly. "The network is ready," Aldrich announced during their morning meeting. "We have supporters in 12 major towns and 3 cities. Palace servants, merchants, farmers, even some nobles who are tired of the corruption." Lirelei studied the map spread across the table. Red marks showed where their allies were located, and blue marks showed government strongholds. "What about the capital city? Do we have people inside the palace?" "That's where things get interesting," Aldrich said, with a slight smile. "Torvin, would you like to tell her?" Torvin looked nervous, which was unusual. Over the past months, he had become one of their best scouts and strategists. But right now, he looked like the anxious servant she had first met years ago. "There's something I need to tell you," Torvin said, avoiding her eyes. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Lirelei felt her stomach tighten. "What is it?" "I'm not really just a palace servant," Torvin said quietly. "My real name is Prince Torvin of the Eastern Kingdom. I was sent to your palace when I was 15 as part of a secret diplomatic mission." Lirelei stared at him in shock. "You're a prince?" "My father wanted someone inside your court to monitor the political situation. I was supposed to be a spy, but I never actually spied on anything important. I just worked as a servant and tried to stay invisible." "Why didn't you tell me?" Lirelei asked, feeling hurt and confused. "At first, because it was my mission to stay hidden. But later, because I was afraid you'd think I had been lying to you all this time. Honestly, I liked being just Torvin. Being a prince never made me happy the way helping you did." Aldrich cleared his throat. "The reason this matters now is because Prince Torvin's father has agreed to support our cause. The Eastern Kingdom is willing to provide troops and supplies to help us restore legitimate rule." Lirelei sat down heavily in her chair. Everything was moving so fast. A few months ago, she had been learning to make soup and chop wood. Now, people, we're talking about armies and political alliances. "I need some air," she said, standing up abruptly and walking outside. Torvin followed her. "Lirelei, please let me explain." She turned to face him. "Explain what?" "That our entire friendship was based on a lie? That when I thought I was opening my heart to a loyal servant, I was actually talking to a prince who was probably judging everything I said and did." "No," Torvin said urgently. "Ow. It wasn't like that at all. Yes, I was sent there as a spy, but I never reported anything important to my father. And everything that happened between us, everything I felt, that was all real. How do I know what's real anymore?" Lirelei asked, tears forming in her eyes. "Because you know me," Torvin said simply. "The person who followed you into exile, who learned survival skills with you, who has fought beside you for 6 months, that's the real me. The prince part is just a title, like your princess title used to be just a title." Lirelei looked at him for a long moment. She thought about everything they had been through together, all the times he had risked his life for her, All the nights they had sat by fires talking about their dreams for a better kingdom. "Are you saying you gave up being a prince to become a rebel?" she asked. "I'm saying I chose to follow my heart instead of my duty," Torvin replied. "Just like you did when you chose to fight for your people instead of just trying to get your crown back." Despite her anger and confusion, Lirelei felt a smile tugging at her lips. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? Exiled princess and a runaway prince." "The best kind of pair," Torvin said, relief flooding his face. 3 weeks later, their plan was set in motion. Using information from supporters inside the palace, they learned that Lirelei's cousin was planning to sign a treaty that would give away large portions of the kingdom's land to foreign powers in exchange for personal wealth. "This is our chance," Aldrich explained to the assembled rebels. "The people will never support a ruler who sells their homeland. If we can expose this treaty and present Princess Lirelei as an alternative, the whole kingdom will rally to our cause." The plan was complex but brilliant. While Lirelei and a small group entered the capital city disguised as merchants, other teams would simultaneously take control of key buildings and communication points. The goal wasn't to fight a bloody war, but to present overwhelming evidence of corruption while showing that the people had a better choice. On the night of the operation, Lirelei found herself standing outside the palace walls where she had once lived. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had been escorted out of these gates as an exile. "Ready?" Torvin asked, adjusting his disguise as a traveling trader. "Ready," Lirelei replied, though her heart was pounding. What followed was the most intense night of her life, using secret passages that loyal servants had left unlocked. They made their way through the palace to the throne room where her cousin was meeting with foreign ambassadors. "Stop," Lirelei commanded, stepping into the room, with documents in her hand. Behind her, Torvin and 6 other rebels appeared with weapons drawn. Her cousin's face went white. "You're supposed to be dead," he stammered. "I'm supposed to be a lot of things," Lirelei replied calmly. "But right now, I'm here to show the kingdom what kind of ruler you really are." She held up the treaty documents they had intercepted. "Selling our people's heritage to foreign powers. You're betraying everything our family has protected for generations." By morning, word had spread throughout the capital. People poured into the streets, not to fight, but to celebrate. Palace guards laid down their weapons and joined the crowds. Nobles who had supported the corrupt regime quietly disappeared, while those who had been secretly working for change stepped forward to help with the transition. Lirelei's coronation took place exactly 1 year after her exile. But this time, it was different. Instead of a crown ceremony in a closed palace, it happened in the town square where all the people could attend. Instead of promising to rule over her subjects, she promised to serve them. "I learned something important during my time away," she told the crowd. "True leader isn't someone who sits on a throne and gives orders. True leader is someone who understands the struggles of their people because they've faced those struggles themselves." She established new laws that protected workers' rights, created councils where common people could have a voice in government decisions, and made education free for all children. The kingdom began to prosper in ways it never had before, on quiet evenings. When the day's royal duties were finished, Lirelei and Torvin would sometimes walk to the palace gardens and remember that desperate night in the frozen cabin that had started their journey together. "Do you ever miss the simple life?" Torvin asked one evening as they watched the sunset. "Sometimes," Lirelei admitted, "but then I think about all the good we can do from here, and I know we made the right choice." "Besides," Torvin said with a grin, "if we ever get too comfortable, we can always go camping in the mountains again." Lirelei laughed. "I think once was enough for that adventure." As they walked back toward the palace, both of them felt grateful for the journey that had brought them here. They had started as a princess and a servant, become refugees and rebels, and finally emerged as partners in creating a better world. The desperate command that had once echoed in a freezing cabin, "Get in my bed now," had become a joke between them, a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had learned about what really mattered in life. It's not titles or crowns or royal beds, but the courage to care for others and the wisdom to lead with both strength and compassion.